Hey everybody, it's Boo Ray Perry from Tampa, Florida, and today we are going to talk about manual mode and why, if you don't shoot in manual mode, you're not a real photographer. Okay. I don't really think that. I don't really believe that, and I know that it's a clickbait title for a video, but that's the argument and the discussion that I hear all of the time, and I want to talk about it today and really kind of get into it today. So buckle up. Let's talk about the whole. If you don't shoot in manual mode, you're not a real photographer. First of all, where does it come from? Well, it comes from a lot of older photographers. I've spent a lot of time in camera clubs and camera organizations, and I've spoken to hundreds of them, and you begin to see this thing where you'll be talking about working with a camera or doing some shots, and you'll be talking about using an auto mode, one of the many auto modes that are built into the cameras. And an older photographer will say, well, I always shoot in manual. And they don't necessarily say it as a way to kind of be a dig, but they kind of do a little bit. There's a little bit a real photographer just sets all the settings themselves, and they don't let the camera do it for them. Like saying, I only drive a car that has a standard shift. I don't drive an automatic. Yeah, come on, right? And there's a couple of things there. There's really a couple of things to unpack with that sort of a statement. So first of all, let's go back to what makes you a photographer. If you pick up a camera or a cell phone and you take pictures, congratulations, you are a photographer. That's all it takes to be a photographer. And there are no levels to photography. Well, you can become a certified professional photographer. I'm a certified professional photographer through PPA, and that's one thing you can do. You can become a master photographer or a master wedding photographer through PPA. You can do stuff like that, which tells the world that you've reached a certain level in your craft and in your art. But if you take pictures, you are a photographer. So what makes you a real photographer? Is it shooting in manual mode? No, it isn't. Because, well, let's look at art, for example. Keith Haring. Remember Keith Haring, right? Maybe you don't, but back in the 80s, Keith Haring made a big splash with his subway work, and then he went mainstream, and I say subway work, his graffiti work, and then he went mainstream, and then it was everywhere. And would you say that Keith Haring was an artist? Well, yes, because he used a medium to express his opinion or his thoughts or to create art. So it doesn't matter that he just did it with spray paint cans on the side of a wall, or if he just did it with one color, or if you're a person who only paints in black and white. You're an artist. Does it make him the same level of artist as, say, Rembrandt? Well, they're both artists, sure, but Rembrandt, I mean, the work that he put in to master light and texture using oil paint, so much greater than, say, a graffiti artist would do. Not to disparage Keith Haring in any way. So they're both artists, but Rembrandt's the real artist? No, that's not right either, really. Real? I don't know, more proficient? Better? No, again, that's qualifying one as being better than the other. How do you describe it? Well, the problem is that in art and in photography as well, is that as people level up, and this is the way people are. As you get better at something, you judge the people who are below you. You qualify them, I should say. And the reason you qualify them is because you see those qualities in yourself. As you learn more things, you begin to realize that, I didn't really know everything I thought I knew. I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. You see yourself now as the amateur that you were. And so now you also see other people as the amateur that they are. And it can come across as a bit arrogant. I only shoot in manual mode. Absolutely. It can come across as a bit arrogant. So do you have to shoot in manual mode to be a real photographer? Absolutely not. No. Using the auto modes on a camera, it's like using automatic in your car. It's just a way for you to get to what you want faster. It's a way for you to get the camera to make a decision for you that's going to be the same decision that you would have made anyway. I set up my auto ISO in my cameras. I have a video about that on my channel, about how I set up my auto ISO in my cameras. And I set that auto ISO up to the way that I think, so that the camera sets the shutter speed for me automatically. All I have to do is set the aperture, and the camera sets the shutter speed and the ISO for me automatically, and they pick numbers that I would have picked anyway. And they can do it faster. The camera can do it faster. It doesn't make me less of a photographer because I do that. However, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't learn to shoot in manual mode. You don't have to. If you want to be a person who shoots in full auto, right? You just set your camera to the big green A and you take pictures. That's great. And you are a photographer. But you are limiting yourself by not taking more direct control over what your imagery will look like. You are basically at this point a photographer who only concentrates on composition because the camera does everything else for you. This is the case if you use your cell phone as well. The camera's doing everything for you. You are just deciding on the composition. Where is the camera going to be in relation to the subject? Where is the subject going to be in the scene? How do I compose this photograph? Now, if you want to get a little bit further down the line and start to adjust other things in the way that your work looks, you have to start playing with the other things. You have to start playing with your ISO and your shutter speed and your aperture. You can do that in an auto mode. I shoot in auto aperture a lot of times. It's because I want to change my aperture. And that's one more step up that ladder towards being a real photographer. But then you also need to go ahead and start messing around with shutter speed too. So let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. And again, what I'm trying to say, if you're a person who doesn't want to mess with this stuff, if you come to a photographer like me and you're like, listen, I just want to shoot in auto mode, I'm going to say, fine, if that's what makes you happy, do it. But you're limiting yourself by not learning to shoot in manual. Even if you don't use it, shooting in manual will teach you what the camera can do, what it's capable of doing, and it will expand your horizon for what you can produce. And every artist needs to have an unlimited horizon so that if they can picture it, if they can think of it, they can create it. And that's what manual mode will do for you. So let's just take a look at a couple of pictures real quick so that you'll see what I'm talking about. So first of all, let's talk about aperture. Aperture is the number one thing. Nothing affects your pictures as much as aperture does in terms of getting the person who's viewing your image to look at what you want them to look at, isolating something in the scene. So this is a picture of me. Now I'm doing a live thing at Imaging USA. This is 3 or 4 years ago, I guess. And I don't even know who took this picture because my camera operator, Savannah, handed her camera or my camera to somebody else and said, take this picture for me. And they did. And luckily, of course, for us, we were surrounded by professional photographers. So I don't know if it was their idea or her idea, but they decided that the cool thing about this picture would be to have a shallow depth of field on the actual camera that is taping me. So that when you look at this picture, I mean, look at all that stuff that's in this picture. If all this stuff was crisp and sharp, it would just become chaos. But by doing it this way and adjusting your aperture this way, you zoom in, your eye goes right to the camera, and it tells the story of, I am being videotaped. It helps you convey the story better. And this can be used in lots of little ways. It's especially used when you do weddings and stuff, when you're taking pictures of details. But I use it on the street a lot. Just walking around the street, I like graffiti. You know, I like the story of how did this get here, who put this here, and why. And so I will often shoot with a very shallow depth of field so that I can really zero in on this little bit of our world that you don't pay much attention to when you walk by it every day. But there's something here. You know, there's art everywhere if you just look for it. So again, shallow depth of field. Now I can do this by shooting in an auto mode. I can put my camera in auto aperture, set my aperture where I want it to be. The camera does everything else and I'm going to be fine. That's fine. I'm using an auto mode. I'm still a real photographer, but I'm using an auto mode. And then you start talking about things like flash. Flash comes into it, it gets a little bit different because now there's a fourth thing. There's aperture, there's ISO, there's shutter speed, there's also flash power. So now it becomes a little bit different. And in an image like this, you really have got to balance a lot more. So I'm thinking when I take this picture, I want the back of this church to be slightly out of focus, but not totally out of focus. I don't want it to be just a mush. I want you to be able to see the definition in the windows, but I want it to be slightly out of focus so that the people stand out. So I'm going to set my aperture accordingly. This was probably, if I had to guess, was probably shot around 5.6. So I'm going to set my aperture there. Then I have to set my shutter speed and my ISO so that the back of the church will have enough light to be visible so the windows aren't blown out. Because the flash is going to light the people, but it's not going to light the back of the church. So I have to set my shutter speed and my ISO to get the back of the church the way I want it to look. I set my aperture to get the blur that I want, and then the flash power, which will be auto, the flash power will light my subjects. So 3 of my settings of the 4, I'm setting by hand. I'm in full manual mode here. And then I'm letting the flash decide for itself what it wants to do in terms of light. If it doesn't give me the light I want, I'll turn it to manual as well and adjust all 4 manually. So using manual mode here is almost required. I don't know anyone who works this way with light on location who isn't in full manual mode in order to get what they want. Now, also, it comes into play when you're using shutter speed. You can let the camera select your shutter speed for you. And I don't have to talk about sports. Everybody understands if you're shooting sports, you've got to have a high shutter speed. So you can set an auto mode. You can be in shutter priority and set your camera so that your shutter speed never drops below 1,000th of a second, and then you know you're going to be fine taking pictures of the soccer game. But if you go into manual mode and start to play around with your shutter speed, you can do creative things that you cannot do in an auto mode. You know, this picture that I took of a bicyclist, right? I had to pan my camera. I had to turn my camera as he came by. I had to have my shutter speed set long enough that it would blur the background as I moved my camera, but fast enough that I could still hold him in focus during the pan. It took me several different shots with several different shutter speeds to finally find the right one. And then sometimes you can decide that blur is a good thing. Sometimes you can be like, let's find the correct shutter speed to use in this situation to blur everything and give me something else that's a creative in a different way. Good, bad, I don't know, but it's mine, right? It's my idea. I'm having fun with my photography. You know, a little trick I like to do sometimes at bar mitzvahs when the color things come out is I like to try and blur and I actually twist the camera as I take the picture. And you have to get the shutter speed to just the right speed so that when you twist the camera, it shows the motion of the stuff around, of all the lights around the subject. And that's a tricky thing. You'll take 4 or 5 pictures before you finally nail the correct shutter speed. So in this case, I'm in, let's see, with a flash here, I'm in full manual mode. Only the flash is not in manual mode. Do you have to shoot in manual mode to be a real photographer? No, you don't. But if you wanted to be an artist who worked in paint, and you just decided from the very beginning that you were going to only work in, this is even good, let me put it a different way. If you're like, I want to be a painter, and then you just reached, and you let someone else pick what type of brush you were going to use and what color you were going to use, you could create some good art. You could learn to work within the restrictions of not knowing what you were going to do there and create some good art. But if you could pick your own brush, if you could pick your own color, your paint, your own type of paint, your own canvas, your own scene, if you could pick everything yourself, it would just widen out the whole world for you. So you could create whatever you wanted. And some people need the restriction, to be honest. But most people, the more they get into their art form, the more unrestricted they become. People don't tend to start off crazy and then narrow down. It tends to go the other way around. They start off with one thing and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I have a friend of mine that is a great artist, but also she's a great sculptor, and she's just everything great because she loves to bring everything in. So you're a real photographer no matter what you do. Go out, have fun, use your camera. But when someone says, I shoot in manual mode, what they're really trying to say to you is, I've learned how to use my tools. And I've learned how this brush is different than this brush. And this paint is different than this paint. Which means I have put a lot of work into trying to understand this medium that we are creating in. It's fine if you don't want to, but I'm operating at a different level than you are. The way they say it is, I only shoot in manual mode is, okay, that can sound bad. But I think that, although there are some people who are trying to be arrogant, that other people aren't. A lot of people, especially older photographers, when they say that, what they're saying to me sometimes is, I shoot in manual mode because that's what I learned to shoot in, and I've never bothered to actually learn how to use the sophisticated technology that has come after that. Because there is sophisticated technology now that can absolutely make your life easier and still give you the control that you want, and they just haven't bothered to learn it. That's just I feel the same way that they feel. I'm like, that's a shame that you haven't learned that. And they're thinking, that's a shame that you haven't learned that. So don't take offense when they say it, but also keep your mind open to the idea that limiting yourself may not be the best thing for your art. That the more you learn, the better. And don't forget, I have a whole series of videos on this channel that show they explain everything. Bouet explains ISO, shutter speed, aperture, depth of field. All of these things are explained. I have videos for all this stuff on my channel. I also have a couple of free ebooks for you. So go pick those up, and just links are in the description. I got a free ebook, which is 20 definitions you should know, which is my way of saying, if you want to be a real photographer, you should understand these things, understand these definitions and how they work with your camera. And I've also got videos on how to work on location with off-camera light, and I've got a great ebook on how to work with natural light on location. And all of it's available on my website. Be sure and check it out. And also be sure and check out all my gear, because if you click a link and you buy a piece of gear from Amazon after I have recommended it, I get a little tiny, but you have to use a selective aperture just to make it show up how little money I make when you buy something from my channel. But every little bit helps, and it helps me to keep this channel going, because right now I should be working and instead I'm making this video. And hey, be sure and follow me on Threads and on Instagram. I've got a group called Pro Photo Talk on Facebook, which is a great group, but also I post a lot on Instagram and a lot on Threads. And if you join the community there, I think you will really enjoy it. And be sure and give me a like and give me a subscribe. And if this is your first time watching my channel, be sure and ring the bell when you do that. All right? Thanks. Go out there and be a real photographer.